Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Clark, and welcome to another episode of our Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development interview series. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm joined today by a good friend of mine and fellow board member on the International Association of Consulting Actuaries, Kyle Rudden. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, this is going to be great. We've got a lot of interesting things that I think people will really appreciate hearing about your experience and thoughts. You've got a fairly unique career backstory that we're going to get into that I think people will really find interesting. So I'm really excited that you took some time out of the day to spend with me.
My pleasure, Michael. Look forward to talking to you.
So I want to jump into it because we do have a lot to talk about, but because there's probably a lot of people in our audience that don't know who you are, I want to give a little bit of a bio so they can start to get to know you a little bit better. So Kyle is a consulting actuary and a chartered accountant with over 30 years of actuarial and accounting experience across life, health, pensions, general insurance, and banking. Having worked from the Caribbean to Canada, Africa to Asia, he knows what it takes to make actuarial work relevant in diverse regulatory and economic contexts. Most of his work is in developing markets, which is results in a fair amount of non-traditional work, which we're going to talk about. And Kyle is based in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, which is kind of cool. Most people probably
No,
don't know a lot about the Caribbean Actuarial Association. We'll talk about that because that's
no.
also.
Let me just say, it's not cool. It's hot, very hot.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And we're recording this at the end of July in 2025, so I am sure it is extremely hot right now. But some other, I mean, if that wasn't interesting enough, I've got more interesting tidbits about Kyle that I wanted to share. I mentioned he and I are both on the board of directors for IACA. He's a past director and president of the Caribbean Actuarial Association, which is actually a very active actuarial association and that with members that have ties to a lot of different associations throughout the world. He's been a volunteer with the Society of Actuaries and the International Actuarial Association since 1997. He is a frequent speaker on actuarial and accounting issues. Now, we're probably going to get into an area here where they're probably going to hate you for what I'm about to say. So it took him 4 years to qualify as an accountant, but only 2.5 years to qualify as an actuary, which is maddening, I think, for a lot of people. In addition to that, when he was 25, he was managing his first actuarial consultancy. And at age 27, he was a partner in an international actuarial consultancy. And then get this, he did all of this without ever having gone to university. That's pretty amazing.
It's different. It's not necessarily the route I would recommend. Honestly, when I finished high school, I didn't know what to do. No one had told me about, hey, you need to do university applications and so on. And to cut a long story short, I ended up working as an auditor with Price Waterhouse. Um, and then a few years later, segued over into the actuarial profession. So it wasn't exactly the normal path.
No, I would say not. And I do want to talk about more of this as well, but I mean, I think what people should take away from this is that you're a pretty smart guy. You did a lot and you did it really quickly to lead you down a career that you've been obviously working in, like I mentioned, for over 30 years. So you must have been doing something right along the way.
I like to hope so. Though honestly, I think I've been blessed with opportunities. Um, it actually led to a very interesting leadership issue because, as you mentioned, I've been getting into fairly senior roles at ages that were pretty young, and there's more like that. And one of the things looking backwards, technical competence, hard work was pushing me into places. Sometimes with just opportunities arose. But if I had to advise anybody, I'd say focus on things like emotional intelligence. It's people you have to deal with, people you're working with, people you're your clients. Um, and that's one of the things that's difficult to do at a young age. So with hindsight, I was woefully prepared in that space as a leader. Neither the accounting profession or the actual profession really teach you how to manage people or deal with real life human issues. And those are the ones that persist. And we can come back at that.
Yeah, and I want to because I do find that interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely circle back to that. But let's start with your career path, since again, it's fairly unique as we've already
Hmm.
established. Talk to us though about how you started out, how you became an actuary, and the roles
Hmm.
you've had since then.
Okay, so um, when I'd finished qualifying as an accountant, I was looking for something else to do. So I did some banking exams because I was doing bank audits and that kind of stuff. And then I was directed into the actuarial profession because, among other things, I was good at maths, right? And hey, if you're good at maths, you do actuarial science, right? Or teach maths. And it just so happened that there was an actuarial consultancy being set up in the Caribbean at the time, which I joined because I'd started doing the actuarial exams when I was at Price Waterhouse, and I was making some progress, but I realized it was kind of difficult to pass the fellowship exams or the higher level exams without actually being the in the profession. And at the time, there was no support from from the accounting firm because they didn't see any usefulness to me picking up this actuarial profession. So I moved over to this actuarial consultancy where, through the standard chain of coincidences, they fired the CEO and they fired his replacement, and then two um, young very recently qualified professionals were made managers. One is Ronald Punafat, who I think you know. He's been an actuary and he's been on
Hmm.
the board of the SOA. He's been in Brazil for many years. So Ronald and I began our management careers running this. We literally got kicked into the hot seat where they were firing everybody left, right, and center. Now, one of the things I had done, I had actually chosen to do the UK exams, the IFOA, because hey,
Hmm.
I'd just done a UK accounting qualification, so I understand UK markets, investment markets, and so on. One of the funny things is, or way back then, the IFOA used to require you to do all the subjects, like all the tracks then.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
and if you stick around the actuarial examinations world long enough, you'll see things cycling back around again. So like the revised current structure of the SOA actually looks like a lot like some of the SOA used to look like many years ago. And so it's kind of interesting. So I had to sit exams in pensions, general insurance, life insurance, and institutional investment. And funnily enough, of all the things I've done, I'm actually, and you had taken an additional one of them. Those are all fellowship exams. You had taken an additional one at specialist level. Well, since I was a UK accountant, I did institutional investment. So by examinations, I'm actually an institutional investment specialist. But I started out doing pensions consulting work. And that's where I cut my teeth, my actuarial teeth, doing pensions consulting. And then later on, I got dumped into a life actuarial role. Then many years after that, I had to redig up back into my general insurance or P&C experience. At that particular
Wow.
point, because I wanted to make sure my credentials are up to speed, that's when I took the ACAS exams. So I'm an
Hmm.
FSA by mutual recognition, but I actually did the ACAS exams. So
Oh man.
yeah,
All
so
right. So you worked started out as the accountant on the accounting side, working for PwC. You had this opportunity to move over to an actuarial firm. And then how did things progress from there? Because at some point, and I didn't mention this as I don't think in your bio, but um, at some point along your career journey, you set up your own shop.
yes, and that, like many of the other aspects of my life, was completely not planned by me. I'd have to say it was planned by a higher purpose. But so the actuarial consultancy in question was eventually bought out by an international consultancy,
Uh-huh.
and teams shifted, and I ended up as country manager, regional manager, and share partner at the age of 27.
Wow.
Which, yeah, wow is right. Um, and I was, and then a little while later on, some other things happened which um, required me to part ways with that consultancy, and I had to start my own company, and that was interesting. um, because that was literally a start from total scratch.
Hmm.
I had a very extensive non-compete, non-solicit, non-everything. And my job had been to solicit everybody in the region, like
Kind of limits your
central.
ability to do anything.
Correct. And we're talking like from Central America go down. So okay, couldn't do anything.
Uh,
So and that was interesting. So literally, I've had the experience of building that from scratch, and that was again interesting. I became a health actuary for a while then, actually, because I couldn't do anything in my existing spaces. Uh, and actually, that's a key quality for any leader, but even more so going into the increasingly volatile environment we live in, and that's adaptability.
mhm.
If it's a general survival characteristic, but I think you need it more and more.
So with your own firm, so you started your own firm. Yeah, I'm just looking at your bio online here on LinkedIn. From the time that you were an actuary, actually from the time you started as an accountant to when you started your own firm, was about looks like about 13 years, somewhere in there.
Let's see. I
Uh,
started working in, yeah, that's about right. Yeah,
it's fairly young to be starting your own firm, but that your firm you've had now for, I mean, you're coming up on 30 years of
correct.
having worked at having, and I understand like, starting out with all of those constraints, that's difficult. Talk to me about what you've done at, so the name of your firm now, KR Services. Um, how have you grown? What do you do? How many employees do you have? I think it'd be interesting
Sure,
for people to know and
sure,
understand a little bit about that part of your career.
sure. Where we are now is around about 20, and we're basically remote or hybrid. When I say that, we went fully remote during COVID, which then um, led us to leveraging remote workers in different countries as well. So, and when I say hybrid, we do have shared office spaces in Trinidad and Tobago where most of us live and work. And the rule is you have to show your face in the office at least 3 days a fortnight because we deal with human beings. We're consultants. We deal with problems that human beings have. And as actuaries, if you're not careful, you can just sit behind a computer screen and leave your video off. That's not a very good way to run a consultancy. So we do, sorry, yeah,
No, I was going to say, and for because it's not maybe common common vocabulary for a lot of our listeners, a fortnight being every other week, every 2 weeks.
every
Yeah,
2 weeks.
every two
Yep.
weeks. So 3 to 4 days in the office every couple of weeks.
Yeah, just to make sure you know how to talk to human beings, socialize, that kind of stuff. Uh, because most of us actuaries are not necessarily the most gregarious and extroverted of people.
Yeah, yeah.
And but these are things you can improve and learn. And communication skills is very important. So so we have people living in like 3, 4 countries. And again, the internet allows you to leverage. So, for example, there's work we do where we subcontract to people in Kenya or people in South Africa. And you couldn't have done that 20 years ago.
No, no. Yeah.
So the world has distinctly changed. In terms of the lines of business, life insurance, general insurance, benefits, the major lines. So there are people working in those teams. Generally, it's valuation work. So for example, pricing general insurance, P&C insurance in the Caribbean is very actuarially unsophisticated compared to, for example, North America.
Hmm.
Um, so in the life insurance space, there's a lot of work in IFRS 17 implementation still, regulatory updates. The benefits world, you still got DB pensions around. I know we've been killing those for 40 years. They're still around. Um, um, there's work on in the banking space. It would be like IFRS 9, expected credit loss modeling, and so on. One of the things you'll find in the the developing world is actuaries tend to be much more multidimensional. Part of that is scale, because obviously if you're in a big company or a big country, you're going to specialize. Where the economies of scale aren't there, you'll find the average actuary in many countries is working in many lines of business. So
No, that I think that's really interesting. And I think that's what I want to get into next is that's led to some interesting projects that you've been engaged to do. So most recently, you and I were together in Sao Paulo at
mhm.
the IAA's joint colloquium of the different sections of the IAA. And I sat in on a presentation that you and a colleague had done uh, that I think people would be interested to hear about, not only that, but some of the other interesting projects that you get engaged to do because you're so multidimensional, right? You don't just focus on one area of practice. So talk to us a little bit about some of these projects that you end up getting involved with and how they,
Sure.
and especially the actuarial nature of it. Because I think what people will find interesting is where you can find actuarial applications outside of the norm.
Absolutely. And that presentation, which we did in Brazil, had the very exciting title Application of Actuarial Techniques in Sustainability Reporting in Non-Traditional Areas with a Focus on Developing Countries. Now, with a title like that, you're bound to get accepted. And I did get ChatGPT to write the abstract. But, and one of the things that you'll find is that actuaries are severely underrepresented in the sustainability space. I'll just step back a second. In all of our actuarial work, climate change has to be incorporated, and we're getting there. We have a lot more work to do, whether that's in projection of benefits in life insurance or pensions, or catastrophe modeling for general P&C insurance, or the impact it has on health. I've been going to a lot of conferences recently. Anywhere I go, two of the main topics are AI and climate change. So even in our traditional lines of business, we all need to upskill and try and figure out how to incorporate climate change because the world is changing. Beyond that, there's a whole space of, let's just call it sustainability. And there are people doing all kinds of modeling and stuff inside of there that if you look at it, you as an actuary say, yeah, I'm familiar with that. I might call it by different names, but that's actuarial stuff. And one of the funniest things that happened to me, because I had to do part of the presentation, my colleague who's a university professor had his university teams doing various side projects that would feeding into the presentation, but I was going to do a sort of a literature review. So I typed the title into ChatGPT and said, please give me examples of actuarial modeling and sustainability, blah, blah, blah. And it gave me these wonderful projects that are being done all around the world, valuing mangroves in the Philippines, or the impact of moving to net zero on coal miners in South Africa. When you look at it, no actuaries were involved. Absolutely none. They're doing demographic projections, economic scenario modeling, and so on. And I realized, whoa, there's stuff we can do here. And that's one of my passions right now, getting the actuarial brand and knowledge, into the sustainability space where people just don't know about us. When I talk to the people that you need to work with, the climatologists, the hydrologists, the engineers, and so on, they say, oh, yeah, that's really good. You can do, yeah, you coming alongside can help us. I have never found anybody saying, no, we don't want you. And on
Mhm.
the other side, talking to us inside the profession and just letting us know, hey, these skill sets are not just transferable, they're desirable because we're actually pretty good at long-term scenario projections. So yeah, so that's definitely one space, sustainability. Um, and you, so yeah, let me pause there.
No, that's great. I mean, I think if we can even go a little bit deeper on that, like if you're able to talk about some specifics like we did in that the presentation in Sao Paulo, um, maybe give people a flavor for what this looks like.
Sure, sure. So two of the specific, well, I'll stick on one, solar energy. Now, generally, if you as an individual or a region or a company or a country are considering a shift of anything to solar energy, you do long-term financial projections and scenario modeling. That isn't usually done by actuaries. So my university colleague, Stokely Smart, who heads the actuarial program at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, he got some, these are kids, these are students. working on a project demonstrating where the price of electricity locally would have to go to make it more viable for the average consumer to shift from normal energy to solar energy, that kind of stuff. And they did really well, applying what we would consider basic actuarial techniques um, to a project. And those kind of projects and cost benefit analyses are done regularly in the space all the time. And no actuaries are harmed or used in their making.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of stuff that's being done that we can move our actuarial graduates um, or even further up the qualification change into. So that was a nice one.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting too, for all the reasons that you listed, right? But let me see if I can reiterate it. The fact that with some of these projects and with your partnership with the University of the West Indies and Stokely Smart, who's there, it's you're giving students that could potentially become qualified actuaries opportunities to work on actuarial projects
Mhm,
that are outside of the norm,
mhm.
which hopefully guides the future of the profession because we're giving these students opportunities to really branch out into innovative areas, like you mentioned, climate change, sustainability. Let me circle back to one thing on climate change, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this because there is some sentiment out there that actuaries don't have any business in climate change, um, not because we're not capable of doing modeling around it, but because we're not climate change experts. How do you respond to that type of criticism of actuaries getting involved in some of these other areas where we're not traditional experts, like we might be in pension or healthcare or other insurance?
Sure. And I mean, when you think about it, historically, actuaries have been, for example, very good life company CFOs or CEOs because the nature of our work basically required us to understand the whole organism from start to finish. And that's excellent. But that's never going to be the case in somewhere like climatology. I am not a hydrologist, a climatologist, or all the other ologists that you actually need to develop what is definitely a problem that requires a multidisciplinary approach. So this is like us going into a space where we're not the 100% experts. We bring a relatively limited expertise into a team. So I don't think the point is a relevant one. I don't pretend to be a climate expert, even though I am doing the SOA climate certification and improving my skills. Um, Climate modeling is pretty complicated. But if you tell me the inputs, you tell me your assumptions, and you tell me, oh, this is how it might affect financial markets, I can work with that. I need your inputs. I'll give you outputs. We'll discuss them. It's team. It's absolutely team. I don't pretend. Actually, let me tell you an interesting story.
Yeah, please do.
Um, and this is where so one of my colleagues, sorry, somebody I know from the University of the West Indies, just won the UN's top prize for the use of AI in climate modeling. The only reason I knew about it is because there was a little picture of it on her LinkedIn post. Now, I know that she knows who actuaries are. I know her, right? So
Hmm.
I went with another colleague over to her team, her research team, and I said, "Hey, Letitia, and um, this is some of the stuff. It was like a consulting assignment. This is the stuff we can do. Is any of this of interest to you? That's consulting 101. Find out what your client needs, and then frame the solution. And in this particular case, it would be a proof of concept. Let's find one thing we can work on together and let's do that. And what they were working on at the time was how do you use satellite imagery and river gauges to get accelerated flood warnings. And so her question, or their team's question, and again, like it was a consulting assessment, we discussed various things. How about what is the value of 15 minutes extra warning? And I said,
Hmm.
whoa, great question. We'll get back to you with that. Now, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. There are people that work in disaster financing and other kind of stuff who actually have already do those kinds of things. Again, coming back to expertise. I'm
Yep.
going to talk to them and find out how to do it. But what I find interesting is you have these people doing this great work. They can benefit from actuarial techniques, but they don't think to ask us.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that would be an example, both answering your question and also saying, hey, now do I know what is the value of 15 minutes? I can think about it, but I'm going to reach out to other experts and see how we can all work together. So that's some of the interesting things.
What I think is really interesting about that is that, like we said, the traditional actuarial practice areas, we tend to own those spaces,
Hmm.
right? We are the experts, but in these types of situations, like what you're describing, we might not be the experts. And there are groups out there that are, but as a profession, we can come and lend our expertise to those other experts. We don't have to be the domain subject matter expert owner, but we can contribute. And I think that's what's interesting because that's very different than the traditional actuarial mindset.
Yeah. I think I'd mentioned adaptability, and I'll add to that a desire to keep learning, but also humility. Let's not pretend we know everything. And that's good from a human individual perspective as well as a professional perspective.
Oh, I love that. I'm jotting that down. Um, One other thing that I want to touch on as it relates to your career, we mentioned that you provide a lot of actuarial services in developing countries. How do you see the profession evolving in these different countries that you work in?
So, in general, the profession responds to societal needs, meaning, and also a society's level of development. So if a country has high insurance penetration, a sophisticated life insurance market, and so on, you're going to find life actuaries. If you are um, dealing with a country that hasn't yet developed any kind of reasonable life penetration, you're not going to find many actuaries.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation because sometimes getting more insurance professionals in a country um, can actually tip things towards greater development. Generally, we work in what would be considered middle income developing countries, because if you
Hmm.
go too far down the developing countries where people are, basically subsistence living and you don't have any financial markets, you're not really ready for any serious actuarial work. You can help with like developmental type work, but you're not going to get a sophisticated insurance market.
Hmm.
But I think generally, how do I see the profession evolving generally? As you would have been listening to all these AI chats and sessions, if you don't know AI, you will be replaced by somebody who does. I think that's a given. That it is transforming the profession tremendously fast. I used to think of myself as an AI early adopter. Then I went to a session last month and I realized, whoa, I'm way behind the curve because AI itself is changing so fast. So
Hmm.
whether you're in a developing country or a developed country, you need to be keeping your eye on trends in AI. That I'll drop that right there. How else do I see the profession evolving? Subject to um, legal constraints, I do see more hybrid working developing. Skill sets seem to be more deliverable on a hybrid basis. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing that in terms of what's going on LinkedIn. People are offering their services and taking short-term contracts and that type of stuff. And you could be
Yep.
doing that from anywhere in the world.
Yep.
Um, you also see a greater diffusion of knowledge. Education itself is shifting. The value of a university degree is diminishing. By the way, I do recommend you get a degree if you can, despite my personal history. Meaning, if you are not keeping your skills up to date, what you learned in university 5 years ago may become irrelevant very fast.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So,
that's for sure. Um, Again, just thinking about developing countries, and some of this will touch on something you had mentioned earlier about people skills and emotional intelligence. What
mhm.
lessons have you learned from working across all these different cultures where you've done business?
humility and respect go a long way. Um, never assume, uh, d- actually assume you don't know it. That's always safer.
Hmm.
Um, I think genuine care will always come across. So even if you make mistakes, um, uh, knowledge, it's always good to learn as much as you can. Um, okay, I'm making generalizations there. Let's drill down to some specific examples.
Yeah, sure.
Um, if you're, for example, I learned Spanish as an adult after school. And I had a brilliant Spanish teacher who, after the first lesson, only spoke Spanish. And apart from that, he did not teach the language. He taught how to communicate.
Hmm.
Because very often people will, oh, only want to speak if I have everything perfect. That's nonsense. All you need to be able to do is communicate. You can
Hmm.
learn the details and get it more perfect afterwards. People respect or appreciate the effort. But even beyond the language, actually, what's more important is getting a basic understanding of the culture. And that's always key to cross-cultural communication. I'll mention something else, though, that I've noticed. This is a specific lesson. It's much more difficult to go cross-cultural on Zoom. I remember a particular case of, and this wasn't very far culture. This is me talking to Mennonite businessmen in Belize. Okay, which means
Okay.
they speak English, but
Hmm.
it's not as distant a culture as, for example, me speaking to someone in Thailand. Okay, but
Yep.
still, they were very frozen, reserved. When I met them face to face, we were great, and Zoom meetings after that were fine. So despite all of the Zoom culture, face to face is actually critical as a consultant if you are, uh, especially if you're going cross cultural, cross border,
Hmm.
and
No, I
and every minute or dollar you invest in learning is not wasted.
I think it's such an interesting insight, right? Because, and this goes back to what you've said about humility, and not assuming that you know everything. I've got to imagine when you start working in different jurisdictions, right? You've got, if you come in with the premise that, hey, I have to learn this. I have to learn what is their regulatory system? What
Mm-hmm,
are the rules here? In addition to the cultural norms, like
mm-hmm,
when you come in with that approach, you have to be curious, right? And I don't think I've ever tied curiosity and humility together as well as I think I have after listening to you, and that's how those things are related. When you can come in and be curious because with the understanding that I don't know and I'm going to find out, can be a very powerful tool for anybody. And
mm-hmm.
and and I think you've been in a unique position to be able to experience that firsthand because of the work you do. But I also think that's very applicable to somebody that, like myself, that tends to just work in the US, right? Whether that's industries or regions, people are going to be different no matter what. While the rules and regulations might be the same, the culture, the corporate culture, is going to vary to and that's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to get
Yes.
curious that can lead you to be a better consultant.
Yep. One of the points I would do want to make a plug for volunteering. Okay.
Sure.
I started volunteering when I was 17. Secretary for the Accounting Student Society. I was kind of voluntold into it, but but since then, I've always I've volunteered. I'm always volunteering for stuff, probably too much stuff, but it's always been rewarding. Um, like the IACA board that we're on, you build relationships, you build networking. Without us being on that board, I wouldn't know you, right?
Fair enough.
And that also is valuable from a business perspective. But
Hmm.
really, you meet great people, you invest in other people's lives, it comes back. It's always in your benefit. So I do find many of my younger actuarial colleagues say they don't have time for it. It's not a sacrifice, it's an investment. I
Yeah.
recommend it. I urge you to volunteer.
I think that's great. I mean, you and I are on the same page with that. We obviously both volunteer together, and also have our separate volunteer roles as well. So, yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. Let's, Kyle, for the last little bit that we have here, I want to turn to a more focused conversation on leadership.
Mhm,
And we've already touched on some of this, and I think it'll be good to just elaborate a little bit more on it. But when you think about people that you consider to be successful leaders,
mhm,
talk to us a little bit about the traits that you see in them. You've mentioned some of them, that emotional intelligence, the people skills, the adaptability, the humility. What does that look like in practice?
what does that look like in practice? Um,
And maybe it's even some of the role models that you've had, right? When
yeah,
people that you look at as successful leaders.
I mean, I've had the opportunity to see many good and unfortunately bad examples of leaderships over the years. And sometimes you can choose to do what's good just by saying, no, I'm not going to do that when I become a leader. So I think most people that are interested in leadership that are looking this webcast would have at least studied a little bit of leadership. Things like inspire the team, don't micromanage, all those kinds of good leadership book stuff.
Hmm.
So let me, since we only have a few minutes left, let me not waste time going through standard leadership stuff. There's good stuff out there. There's lots of good stuff. Um, well, I'm trying to think. I honestly, I have to go back to genuine caring for people, right? Because and let's talk about actuaries. I'm proud to be an actuary. I think the work we do makes a difference in lives. Behind all those numbers, you've got pension plan members, you've got healthcare policy holders, you've got life insurance claimants. We actually make a big contribution to society just from doing our boring number crunching, right? It's a noble profession. That might sound corny, but I actually do believe that. And I think it's good for us to remember that there are people behind our numbers. It helps keep us focused. So, so this weekend I've been doing a lot of traveling, not as much as you, almost. So this weekend I was doing education committee work in Spokane, Washington, right? And I enjoyed that. I happened to look out of my nice hotel window and I see a homeless guy on the street. I'm thinking to myself, how's my work helping society? I'm not saying I personally have a responsibility to go and help that homeless person, but I do want to think that whatever work I'm doing is contributing positively to humanity. And that any leader that's doing that, that's my role model. So I'll pause there.
No, I think that's great. I mean, yeah, beyond kind of the more cliche, stereotypical leadership skills, having that genuine care for people, I mean, that goes beyond having people skills, right? But that's, can you actually develop the care and concern for someone else, whether that's somebody that you can see, or just having that understanding of, hey, there's people's lives that we influence through the work that we do.
Yep,
That becomes a very inspirational and visionary approach, I think, when you're working with other actuaries on your team, right? To help people see the big picture about what we're about.
absolutely, absolutely.
Um, so one last question here. What do you view as the imperatives for future successful leaders within the actuarial profession? I mean, I have a feeling part of this is going to go back to adaptability. I think you've made
Yeah.
that point very clear, and I think it's spot on. Just with how rapidly technology and tools are changing. I mean, we've
Mhm,
seen that within the last few years with AI models and ChatGPT and some of the
mhm.
other ones that are out there. Um, what else? What else does somebody that is going to be a future successful leader, what do they need to be focused on now?
Well, beyond adaptability, beyond empathy, I'd say awareness. Because you need to be aware of what's going on if you're going to adapt to it. So, which goes back in a sense to curiosity, as you said, and
Hmm.
humility. Because let me tell you, when you finish those exams, you don't want to study anything else, right? You really don't, but you have
Yep.
to. You have to be, and adaptability by itself is insufficient. If if there's going to be a flood and you built a car, doesn't work. So you need to know what's coming down the track and adapt according to that. So let's go with those: adaptability, awareness, compassion.
Do you think we do enough on that adaptability front as a profession today?
Um, no, and I'm not saying that as a as in any way complaining about what we're doing. I think
Hmm.
what we're doing is great. Dale Hall and these guys in research generate more stuff than I can possibly read on a weekly basis.
Hmm.
It's just that the pace of change in the world has accelerated beyond normal human systems' ability to handle it. And that's a challenge for us as individuals, as well as a profession. I mean, I think we're doing the right things. I'm not sure what we should be doing more, but like I just said, I thought I was an early AI adopter. And you blink for a month and things have changed again.
Yep.
So it's so yeah, so that's a good question to ask yourself as a person. What could I be doing more to keep adaptable?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great. Well, I mean, Kyle, I've got a lot of good notes here from our discussion today. I think you've made a lot of excellent points about our profession and about leadership, that emotional intelligence, the people skills, but not just, how do you communicate with people, but having that genuine care and concern for other people as a leadership trait. The adaptability, humility, curiosity, all of those things that we can pull together and tie together, I think are spot on, and hopefully have given a lot of people that have listened to this, it's given them something to think about in terms of their own where they're at currently and things that they can do to improve their leadership skills through some of those areas. So I appreciate that.
It's been a great pleasure, Michael.
Well, Kyle, if people want to connect with you and follow what you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn. Just look me up on LinkedIn. My cell phone number's there. My email number's there. Everything's there.
All right. Well, that's perfect. And hopefully people will connect with you and keep up to date on some of the interesting projects that you're involved with and who knows, maybe even find the opportunities to work with you in some form or fashion.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mike.
I want to thank my guest today, Kyle Rudden and Rudden. Man, we even practiced that beforehand. Kyle Rudden. I want to encourage everyone to subscribe and like this podcast to help us share stories like Kyle's that can help benefit the actuarial community. As a reminder, the leadership development community of the CCA is open to any actuary. You don't have to be a member to join. You just need to reach out to the CCA and they'll get you set up. I want to thank Shannon Peterson of the CCA staff for helping to produce today's event. Join us for upcoming CCA events and follow us online on social media and our website. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks again to my guest today, Kyle Rudden.